I agree with everything you've said, but I would like to point to what I see as a tension between the commonly held belief that God foreknows what free people will choose to do by knowing what they would do in any circumstance in which they may find themselves, for example, and his omnibenevolence. I'd like to describe what that tension is as I see it. Does this make sense to you? If a moral agent, in certain conditions at a certain time, chooses one option, but at that time he was aware of and able to freely choose another option, then that shows that he could have chosen that other option, and therefore that some creature similar to that agent, in those very same circumstances, would have chosen that other option. So that God, if he had that kind of foreknowledge, could have made that similar creature instead, who would have made the right choice, for example, if the actual choice was the wrong one. God could have made a similar creature who, in the same circumstances, would have made the right choice. Now, if that makes sense to you, then the point I want to make is this. In any possible world in which there are a certain number, any number, of creaturely free agents who choose to be evil instead of to be good, and are therefore condemned, then if God foreknew that choice on their part, he would also be aware of another possible world containing the same number of creatures who would, under the same circumstances, choose rightly and not be condemned. And since that would be true arbitrarily of however many creaturely free creatures there are in these hypothetical possible worlds, it seems like that would say that if God has this foreknowledge, then he could create a world with arbitrarily large numbers of creatures in it, all of whom would be saved, as it were. So I respect your opinion greater than mine, so I'd like to hear it.
Yeah, this is a really, really interesting question, and I think ultimately, James, one just has to say one doesn't know if those kind of worlds are feasible for God. I take it that what you're saying is, imagine a world in which, say, Peter denies Christ. You're suggesting that maybe God could have created somebody else in Peter's circumstances who would, in every other respect, just look just like Peter. He would have done everything up to that point that Peter did, but he wouldn't have sinned in those circumstances. And then in the future, I suppose this person would have gone on to do the same Petrine sort of things as well. I think all we can just do is just throw up our hands and say it's purely conjectural, that we just don't have any idea of whether or not that kind of world is feasible for God. Especially when you think that these creatures go on into the future, so that even if they acted the same way up to that point, there's still an eternity to come. And it may be that at some place along the line, they will diverge off the path and go wrong in the infinite course of future time, so that we really don't know that those kind of worlds are feasible for God. So I think we're frankly just out of our depth here in speculating as to whether those exist. Here's another thought too, though, that is worth thinking about theologically. Some theologians, including Alvin Flanagan, have suggested that a world in which Christ's self-giving sacrifice on the cross is included is actually a better world than a world, say, that was free from sin and people never did anything wrong, because it wouldn't include the great good of the atonement. And that therefore maybe a world with sin and evil in it is on balance actually better, because it includes the great good of Christ's self-sacrificing, atoning death. Now, I personally don't find that at all implausible. It seems to me that that is a real live option, in which case it may well be that worlds that involve sin and evil could actually have great goods in them that would make them better than worlds that would be free from sin and evil. So maybe God would prefer to have that world in which Peter denies Christ 3 times and leads to the cross.
Thank you, sir.